The Mother series was very important to me in high school. EarthBound got me into the franchise with its bizarre humor and excellent soundtrack, and it was one of the first RPGs I played through after finally realizing that I don't hate the genre as I once believed. When Mother 1 finally released as EarthBound Beginnings on my birthday, I gave that game a try and found a profoundly moving story within the archaic mechanics of an NES RPG. Although neither of these games were perfect, the memories I have of them were almost entirely positive. Fitting with the themes of these games, I got hit with a wave of nostalgia when stumbling across the EarthBound soundtrack a few months ago. And since it had been at least 6 or 7 years since my first EarthBound playthrough, I decided it was time for my second. This review is not based on a blind playthrough. EarthBound was just as charming and weird as I remembered from my first playthrough. The standout element of its presentation was the soundtrack, which uses sampling techniques to create very interesting and memorable music, which sounds far more technically sophisticated than what you'd expect from an SNES soundtrack. Great battle themes, great overworld themes, and don't forget that the soundtrack is one of the major reasons I wanted to play again. The graphics and setting are cartoonish and strange. EarthBound is set in a weird parody of the real world, which is reflected in the outlandish dialogue of the NPCs. It's a funny game, whose brand of absurdist humor has influenced many more modern indie games. Despite how well EarthBound presents itself, the battle system is the real reason to play in my opinion. In a turn-based RPG, unique combat mechanics are very important to me, and the rolling HP system is the best example of such a mechanic I've ever seen. In most games, a full party one-hit kill would be unfair and game-ruining. In EarthBound, it triggers an exciting sequence of fast menu manipulation and quick decisions based on the speed of your party members, since their health has to actually count down to 0 and they're not considered dead until it hits that point. Rolling HP creates these intense moments of action in a genre with typically slower combat pacing. For the first few hours when you only have Ness and his health is too low for rolling HP to ever have impact, EarthBound's combat isn't that interesting or exciting. But as the game goes on, it quickly becomes one of the most fun turn-based systems I've ever played, with meaningful choices in how you use your attacks, psionics, and items. There are a few annoying quirks with EarthBound's menus, which is moderately impactful in a menu-based game. For one, items were really bad at conveying their stats. If you were buying an item, you just had to trust that it was a worthwhile upgrade because the game would only give a visual cue that the shop item was stronger than your equipped item, never the exact difference in strength. The hit chance of weapons and psi attacks and the exact strength of special item effects were also never disclosed. I think this is a needless oversimplification of the genre. I want my information in-game. I do think that EarthBound's buyback mechanic should be an RPG staple though. It was really convenient to be able to automatically sell an item I was replacing. EarthBound is not a perfect game, and on my second playthrough I noticed it's prone to some pretty bad pacing issues. The game seems to be modeled after a Saturday morning cartoon. Onett, Tucson, Threed, and Forside all have their own self-contained stories that take the spotlight for a while, progressing the main plot in the background, like individual episodes in a series. When you hit Summers though, that structure collapses and the game feels a bit lost. While the episodic narrative was interesting, the game brings its main story to the forefront too early for it to reveal anything meaningful, so there's a noticeable chunk of the game that doesn't seem to have any story. You're just following a chain of events to progress further in the world and trying to find more sanctuary locations. And while I understand that finding the 8 sanctuaries is your entire overarching goal in the game, they feel much more satisfying to find when they're integrated into another story, especially since the characters don't have many moments when they get to talk to each other, so they don't pick up the slack from external story elements passing slowly. I hope you find the humor entertaining because that carries the game through its second act. That's not trying to discredit the strength of EarthBound's narrative, because when it's actually focused, it's very compelling. The first half of the game is strong, and the last few hours are even more so. EarthBound supplements its weird plot points with genuinely frightening moments, its bizarre humor supported with surreal horror, wholesome scenes, and moments that imply this actually has never been a game for young kids. EarthBound has a relatively simple story, but the style with which it's conveyed makes it very effective. And while I think Mother 1 handles its symbolism better, EarthBound hits a wide range of emotions with enough to think about under the surface to keep me entertained when its pacing was good. I think EarthBound is an excellent game with an outstanding combat system and an inconsistent narrative, very strong and deep at some points, but shallow and sluggish at others. The game starts slowly, finds itself stuck in a few slow moments later on, but everything comes together for most of the experience to make a very good and unique RPG. In my opinion, EarthBound is generally held back by minor flaws that don't harm the game too much, and even though I'm now more aware of these flaws than I was back on my first playthrough, I still think the game is an easy recommendation and absolutely worth playing today. If you enjoyed the video, please consider leaving a like, subscribe to the channel for more guides, reviews, and highlights, and please consider stopping by my stream at twitch.tv/Quinntik.